May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths crossed his. And those whose paths cross his. And anything else that comes to mind. Well, I listened to myself saying, and those whose paths crossed his, and I wanted to say, no, and those whose paths cross his, because that includes you. Not just, old has-beens, old dogs, as you will hear referred to in the coming podcast. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today we have two guests, Richard and Alice Haspry. Richard and Alice first came to the San Francisco Zen Center. I think it was before it was even called the San Francisco Zen Center, 1968. They heard a lecture and met Shunryu Suzuki and some people. And then in 1970, they moved into the Page Street building. And various things happened in between that you will hear about. And then Chogyam Trungpa students, and he had them stay at Tassajara a couple of practice periods and then go to Rocky Mountain Dharma Center in Colorado and help get that place going. Now they live in Nova Scotia, where Trungpa moved his center back in the early 80s, I think. They talk about all that. So, that's enough intro for them. So after our pause to meditate, let's just give them a call, huh? So when you hear the bell, hit pause if you're of such a mind, and meditate or whatever for as long as you wish. And when you are ready to come back, hit unpause, and we'll be here to hit the bell to end the meditation and give Richard and Alice a call. Well, hi there.
Hello.
Hi there.
So here we are. So, you all look excellent. I love that picture of you with your son.
Oh yeah, that was the 3 years, exactly 3 years ago. Yeah, somehow he's been here we've been visiting, but somehow we never take pictures like that. I take pictures of the little boy, of the grandson, right?
Yeah.
But somehow we take pictures together. So
Right. On the podcast goes up on Podbean, and there's just one picture, so I'll use that one. But on Cuke.com on the podcast page, we have a then and now picture.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's a real neat picture of you all at Tassajara. So, what are you up to right now?
I don't know. It's dark and cold.
Oh, that's
very windy.
What'd you say?
It's very windy.
Yeah.
Windy, dark, and cold. You're in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ooh, that just sounds so much like a frontier.
Yeah, it is.
Well, where we live, right on the ocean, we live on the bay that's right near the mouth of the North Atlantic. So we live in a very windy spot, even for Nova Scotia. So. And it's actually been like last week, within, I think, 48 hours or 60 hours, we had like over a foot of snow, and then it melted and we had torrential rain and all the snow is gone. And then it was kind of a normal temperature, and now the temperature, it's not that cold, but the temperature's dropping.
Yeah.
So it's crazy weather.
Because after the snow, the rainstorm was also a thunderstorm, which is rare.
Unbelievable thunder and lightning.
Oh, you don't get that there much?
No.
Yeah.
We get some. But...
some in the summer, but this is December.
Right. Well, the Arctic just hit an all-time high, I guess, a few months ago or something, 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Are you in Bali's winter now?
No.
Well, we don't say winter. It's rainy season.
Okay.
But aren't you in the southern hemisphere? Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
You're not different seasons.
Oh, no, we're not in the winter. We're in the summer. No.
Yeah.
Yes, we're in the summer, but we don't say that. It's rainy season. And it is cooler in June, July, August, September, around there. That's the best time. And it gets a little windy. Yeah, I love it then. But it doesn't get too hot, really. Humidity is more a thing to me. But our home is so shaded, and I'm here a lot, and I'll be working. I'll be sitting outside in front on a settee working, and then I'll go out in front of the gate under the sun, and I go, oh, wow, it's hot. Yeah. So how do you spend your time there in Nova Scotia?
Well,
I don't know. You're catching us at a kind of a strange time.
Yeah.
Maybe it should be more organized. I don't know. It's not strange for any particular reason. It's just kind of, I don't know.
No, it is a strange time because it's an extended experience of being isolated by the pandemic.
Yeah.
And we have an upsurge in this pandemia here, the pandemic here, because a new variant has come into through Africa and in Europe and the Americas now. And it's a new name. It's Omicron is the name of it. And its characteristic is that it's very transmissible, maybe twice as transmissible as the Delta variant, which has been very transmissible.
Yeah.
So the history is this is the second Christmas. Nova Scotia is very good about its healthcare system, and people follow public health advisories. So there's been very little COVID, and it's never really expanded. And it was right near the time at which you could declare the province really open.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe 3 days ago, or no, last week.
Yeah, something.
Not very long ago, an outbreak occurred, and now the public health cry is back and shutting things down and limiting behaviors. Anyway, for us, it's created a kind of, for me anyway, created a kind of isolation.
Yeah.
Well, there was there's several universities in Nova Scotia. And one of the big ones, up in a sort of a northern part, had one of their main it's called the ring ceremony, where all these rings are given out to these graduates. So because the restrictions were lowered, then all these people came, parents and people came from all over. And so it's one of those things that caused, like, for Nova Scotia, a huge outbreak. For several days now, there have been like 150 cases each day, which if you live in Brooklyn, New York, is like, that's like a great day. But Nova Scotia doesn't even have 1 million. Nova Scotia's population is under 1 million. It's like, I don't know, it sort of goes up and down, but it never seems to get over 1 million. And so it's a lot now for the province, and mainly for the healthcare system. Like, that's the whole thing of not overwhelming. But it's also made, people sort of paranoid. Like, we thought, oh, we'll go to a James Bond movie on Christmas Eve. We'll go to a movie theater, which we haven't gone to for forever. We never go to movies anyway, but we used to go to movies on Christmas Eve and go to a Chinese restaurant on Christmas Day when we lived in New York for all those years, because the Jewish people and the Buddhists would go out to Chinese restaurants.
Right, right.
Nova Scotia is so Christian, just sort of, like that the Chinese restaurants even close and everything closes. So we, now we're thinking we probably shouldn't go to the movie, and we'd like to go get dim sum next weekend, but maybe we shouldn't go there either. It's just,
yeah, it's coming back.
It's all coming back again. And they keep talking about the older people, it's like,
yeah, right. Well, let me ask you, this outbreak you're having, is it Omicron?
Yeah, yesterday they reported that 40 of the cases were.
But that's like,
so that means
that was like more than a third.
Yeah. So that just means there's going to be more.
Yeah. Now, I read an article by the head of the Medical Association of South Africa, a woman who had been the one to report on Omicron. Not the first time they knew about it, but because it was her, it hit the news worldwide. And she said it's very mild. Nobody's been in the hospital. And the whole world has overreacted, and they're not doing that in South Africa. She said they're not increasing restrictions or anything. Now, that was a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if it's changed. But, she said it's been very mild. It's transmissible, but very mild. And that happens a lot with viruses. They get weaker as they evolve.
What people say, what the New York Times will say, or what people like NPR, or the public, what is it called, the PBS, the public news hour station, like U.S. Yeah, in the U.S., like that the population in South Africa, the people that generally it's a younger population. And so everybody says that, and then they're just waiting. But what I think is that even so, the more people get it, the more chance for it to mutate, and the more likely somebody could get, especially people in what they say congregate settings like nursing homes or so on. So I think in Nova Scotia, a lot of it is that the healthcare system just cannot handle a whole bunch of people. And it's, getting sick or having to be in ICU or all that.
Yeah, she said that's not happening.
Yeah, and it's not happening. And it hasn't ever happened here.
No. She said that's not happening with Omicron at all. They're not going to ICU. They're not going to hospitals. They're not a burden on the health system. Now, maybe there's, maybe it's there's new developments, and that didn't turn out to be true, but that's what she said. What we have here in Bali? the last time I looked, we had 3 new cases. That's a population of 4.5 million.
Yeah.
And that's in one day. 1 death, 3 new cases, 152 people still, what would you say, positive? Not recovered yet, but, and still we're on a lockdown. There's no tourists, or very few tourists, and maybe right now entirely just Indonesian ones. I don't know. It's not much. They make it really hard to come here now. And they upped the quarantine to 10 days because of Omicron. And it had gone down to 2 days. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Well, all right.
In terms of what we do every day, or what we're up to, I don't know. I'd say I'm in a late life crisis of looking at just kind of feeling stymied in many directions. I don't particularly. I don't know what to say to you. We saw you in 2008, I guess, and we went to Zen Center.
Mm-hmm.
We went to that reunion, and
that was neat.
I don't know. You must edit these interviews, right, to put in what you want to put in, right?
No.
You just put in the whole thing like this from now on?
Yeah. Yeah. It's fine. It's just us talking. If, it's fine. If you say something terrible you want out, just say so. And, but I don't even go over what you say. I just go over what I say. And
so just to describe this situation of feeling somehow over these last, I guess since 2018, which is when, speaking personally and what happened with Richard and I, when I was diagnosed with this cancer that was an aggressive kind. Luckily, it was stage 1 cancer, and I had surgery almost 3 years ago. And since the time of that surgery, there has been no sign of cancer, except because it was the kind it was, I had to have chemo and radiation and more chemo.
Even now?
No, it's been over now for a year and a half.
Yeah, all right.
Year and a half. It's been over. But then that, getting through that, and the treatment for that also coincided with what we talked about with what was happening in Shambhala, in the Shambhala community, with the leadership, with the Sakyong's leadership, and all of the Me Too stuff that happened around him. So sort of falling apart physically and getting together, and then that falling apart, beginning to fall apart. And then we also had
Wait a minute. Would you explain what group you're talking about and who the Sakyong is? And what are you talking about there?
So the Shambhala Buddhist organization, Trungpa Rinpoche founded, that our teacher, who was our teacher, after we left Zen Center.
Yeah.
Trungpa Rinpoche, who met, Suzuki Roshi and loved him.
Yeah.
Then his son became the leader of the organization. Mm-hmm. And sometime in 2018, is that when? In 2018, various women brought forward claims or saying things of how he'd mistreated them in different ways. And a person collected all of this and published it as the so-called Sunshine Report.
Mm-hmm.
And this precipitated sort of a tsunami or a tidal wave or an earthquake of crumbling, of things falling apart of him making apologies, but people not accepting the apologies. And then the whole board, his whole board of directors resigning, different teachers resigning. I was a senior teacher, and I did called a Shastri, which is it's borrowed from the Hindu or the Indian tradition. It just basically means
Scholar.
Yeah, scholar,
Text
teacher.
scholar.
Like there are, I guess, people who are experts in India on like air conditioners. The term is used. The term is used for all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had a senior teaching role.
Mm-hmm.
And because both Richard and I have been what they called senior teachers for many years in Shambhala.
Yeah.
And sort of coinciding with when I began the treatment for cancer and all of this happening in the organization, I just decided to so-called step aside or retire, whatever.
Yeah.
I didn't really say any reason, either what was happening to me personally or anything. I'd done it for a long time, so it was just and many people did that. Mm-hmm. And so there's been a fragmentation in the organization, which is in people going with different teachers and people really still being angry and hurt and upset by the Sakyang. And then meanwhile, the Sakyang and his family left for Nepal, where his wife's family is. His wife's family, her father's a Tibetan Buddhist Lama teacher, and they're there. That's where they are. And he's teaching from there. But for me personally, at this time, it's all of these things coming together along with different personal things that we've gone through with our son and are now more or less, opened and resolved. So all of these things happening at once. And now I'm supposedly healthy, apparently I'm going to live, it seems, unless something else, like anything could happen to anyone. But I'm sort of, I don't know exactly what to do. So it's kind of like I'm not really here or there, and it's hard to like bring together and stay motivated about something. So,
well, especially since we're cut off from one another, I'm quite used to living in sort of communal scenes where you're a member of a Sangha, and you see them all the time. In some cases, like at Zen Center, people just live together.
Yeah. And where
practice together, and there's a whole lifestyle that sort of bridged practice and study with livelihood. Now that opportunity to be around and be with
and practicing
with people,
sitting with people.
You can't do that.
You can't get together. Like where we live on St. Margaret's Bay, there's a small Shambhala center that's actually a very nice building that's owned, and it's been here for almost 30 years now, that building and that community that built it, Trungpa Rinpoche students, etc. And I was the senior teacher there, and I'm still in charge of what's called practice and education there, but we can't meet there, because of all of the health guidelines from COVID. So that shut down. So it's cut off from like we feel there's the sense of kind of adrift and trying to figure out what to do. And I guess what I want to say, and then I'll probably stop talking, except to say more about a timeline of what we've done, that in this time, what comes to me or what I have complete connection to and sort of wakes me up and cheers me up, or is remembering things that Suzuki Roshi said, remembering practicing there, remembering being there, those very early times, like I was only 20, probably 22 or 23, but sitting all those sessions, we lived at Page Street and sat every single session, and then went to 2 training periods at Tassajara, and then went to Rocky Mountain Dharma Center from Tassajara and led month-long sittings, meditation programs. Richard and I did many of them. And so all of that, that connection with Suzuki Roshi and things that he said will come to me, and Katagiri Roshi, and we became very close to Kobun Chino, and was very, devastated when he passed.
Yeah.
When he died that way.
Yeah.
So, having had those teachers and having such a strong connection with Trungpa Rinpoche, who knew Suzuki Roshi, who knew Kobun Chino too. And
Kobun was teaching at Naropa. He was
Kobun was teaching at Naropa. Right. Kobun made these beautiful calligraphies that we have here. When Richard was teaching in France at something, and Kobun was also there, and they got together, Richard and Kobun, probably sharing a drink, shall we say? And Richard came back from teaching saying, we have to study with Kobun more. I want to do that. And we were ready to do that. And it was just like months after that he died. So then losing him, So Trungpa Rinpoche died in 1987. And his son, the Sakyang, the current Sakyang, then began taking over. And sort of slowly, the Sakyang studied a lot in India. But then when he came back and started teaching, he improved and became a very good teacher, and then went through all this, and then everything has fallen apart. And we were taking a Zoom class, part of a class that I'd been teaching as well. I did one class, and one of the great people, you probably don't know him, Marty Janowitz, was teaching. And he was very close to Trungpa Rinpoche. And what he said is, it's preposterous that this is what's happened to Shambhala, that everything that we were taught, that it's fallen apart in this way. So the preposterous nature of the fragmentation and people not being able to figure out or talk to each other or know what to do, it's inexplicable how this happened,
Yeah. Now, what's preposterous about it? I mean, what the first thing I think of is that Trungpa was had a rather indulgent lifestyle. He drank a lot, and he made a thing out of it. It wasn't hidden in the slightest. And also, he had sex with, or was with, enormous numbers of his female students, and everybody knew it, and there was no secret, and still it was a very strong practicing community. And I would visit in Boulder, and I really liked it there. And, I liked the people. They were really solid. So then I hear years later that there's a problem with Shambhala, although it's never been explained to me like you have. Because the Sakyang, had some affairs or something. I go, well, he's in a lot of trouble. What happened that's so awful, Well,
that's the thing. What's also changed, like you would say, why would this community not be like the community surrounding his father during his father's life,
Yeah.
who accepted and were more or less, I guess some of us, a great many of us, we didn't exactly resist or question his lifestyle. Sometimes it was concerning or worrisome. You think, oh, his health is not so at this time. On the other hand, he was just pouring out incredible amount of teachings, and he was working towards creating an enlightened society, and he brought up forward teachings that are his Dharma teachings that I think would be they're definitely applicable at this very moment, because we are now living in a society where fear is sort of the bottom line.
Right.
And a lot of very extreme behavior is arising from people's fears.
Yeah.
And some politicians like Mr. Trump took advantage of that, and other right-wing pundits around the globe are playing this card as well. They're frightening people.
Well, not just right-wingers. There's a tremendous amount of influence coming from Russian, brilliantly targeted messaging, just throwing a monkey wrench into the West and trying to weaken the West. And I think Putin is the most successful world leader in modern times from what he's done and how he's manipulated Trump and created a mess in America that's my interpretation of it. Now, a lot of other people don't interpret it that way, but I just think he's been brilliant. And America is so open. And it allows so much freedom that it's really vulnerable. It's been by far the most on defense, but like old-fashioned defense, right? And defense which has gotten unusable because it would kill everybody on Earth. But there's no defense for the attacks that are actually happening, and very skillfully happening. Anyway, please continue.
So to go back to what happened, to create this, what I love the word preposterous situation with Shambhala is, I think, I don't think it'd be useful to try to go into, or even, it isn't useful to me or anybody to go dwelling on the particular things or what were said or what people are accusing anybody of. That when Trungpa Rinpoche met all of us, we were hippies. There was everybody more or less came from that. So we just jumped right in, the whole thing. And he said to many students, I know he said it to Richard, he said it to me in different ways, and many people, like he would say, you cannot imitate me. Yeah. You cannot imitate me. And he told people that over and over again. Yeah. And he, we saw, you couldn't deny looking at his pictures year after year as we knew him that, things, he wasn't doing well physically. You could see it right in front of you, but still he was brilliant in the way he taught. Yeah. And then and he was right there, and everything was accommodated. And he basically, what you saw is what you got. That isn't to say that everything was visible or there were things I don't know about going on. That it wasn't like that. There were all kinds of things going on, but basically it all worked. Then his sickness and death and everything that went on with his heir, his original heir, the regent.
Yeah, Earl Tenzing. Yeah.
Then there was that particular disaster.
Right.
That happened with the community. And that was never really resolved.
Mm-hmm.
What people thought happened, what happened, who did what. So that we managed to come back from that. People just moved around. People came back together. Some people stayed separate, but it got more fluid. And then the Sakyong developed as a teacher, and everything began to open up. He got married. So all this stuff that began to come up, some of it was shocking in that, but then others of it was like, he wasn't married for a long time. Of course he was having relationships with people. And then, but the fact that he was more private in many ways, and that when things started to really come out, it was like, oh, that's not what I thought he was.
Yeah, I see. Right.
That, it was the sense of, in some ways, I'd say the same thing about what Zen Center went through
Right.
with Richard Baker in some ways, that what you saw was not what you got, that what you were being told, really the stories, the narrative didn't mesh. And for some people, and that was a huge, big thing.
Right.
That's remained that way. And then as it's gone on, people have hardened their positions. Now, I think the Sakyong is teaching to hundreds of students. He's in Nepal. He's teaching online. New students are beginning with him. Old students are coming back.
Mm-hmm.
But this is relatively recent.
Yeah, recently, over the last year.
Yeah.
It started happening that people asked him to teach. People went there to Nepal, requested him to teach. And so he teaches, and there'll be hundreds and hundreds of people on these Zoom teachings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he's, and we've seen him teach, and he's very relaxed in that context and teaching, and he's a good teacher. It's all outside of whatever it was that existed before.
Mm-hmm.
The Shambhala organization and he are now separate.
Yeah.
He has his own organization. For me, like when, this quandary or kind of styminess or kind of feeling paralyzed is, then there are all kinds of newer students or people who say the Shambhala teachings, these teachings about society and about fear and the nature of fear and all of those teachings that Trungpa Rinpoche gave, which he called the Shambhala training teachings, those have changed my life. So we don't need the Sakyong. I mean, the newer people who came around have never met him, and they think, oh, we could just have this. We could just have this great group. And then I think, I don't want to be part of like something run by some committee of something.
Yeah, right.
Like another group, like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens to institutions and to groups is they evolve and tend to run into various problems and rearrangements. And, if you're in on the early days of them, basically it gets disappointing how it evolves. But, there's still what I've seen anyway is there's still a lot of great individuals and good things happening, and you just can't expect it to have the freshness and excitement of a newly forming group, with the founding teacher.
We're in the category in this community, in this society, it's called old dogs.
You're the old dogs. Right. Well, yeah, I'm definitely an old dog. So when did you come to Nova Scotia?
83, but then we had to leave. We didn't have a landed.
We didn't have, the immigration didn't work out. So
So we had to leave and we went back to Boston. And when we did get landed status in 1990 is when we moved.
And why did you go there?
Why did we come to Nova Scotia?
Right.
Basically because Trungpa Rinpoche asked us to come move here.
Was he living there then? Well, not in 1990, but in 1983?
Not 93, he wasn't. No, well, he had, when was that building by the Armdale Rotary?
He was coming up.
Yeah, he had a house.
But earlier, I'm not sure which year it was, he decided that Nova Scotia was a place where he wanted to move he did move the headquarters and everything to Nova Scotia because he felt this area, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, this area was a place where Buddhism and, what he called enlightened society, where this place was a good place for it. So he wanted students to move here. He asked us to move here.
Yeah.
He asked his students to move here. He thought this was a place where enlightened society could happen.
And so that started happening in the early 80s.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, but he had asked you to go to New York. So why don't you start, when you left Zen Center?
We went to Rocky Mountain Dharma Center.
Right. And that was planned. That was all planned. You all were students of his, even when you were at Zen Center in the last year there.
Yes.
Yeah, we met him when he came to San Francisco. And then when I really fell in love with it was when I saw him. He was sitting with Roshi on that courtyard at Page with the wisteria and blooming and everything, and that was it. And then when I went and saw him, he said that as long as Roshi was alive, that was the only place I should be. So and that he wanted us to go to Tassajara. So Baker Roshi knew that. And that's why we went to Tassajara and he gave us scholarships to go there.
Trungpa Rinpoche asked Baker Roshi to.
Yeah, Trungpa Rinpoche asked Baker Roshi to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So after Roshi died is when we went to Tassajara.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then Rinpoche wanted us to leave Tassajara and go right to Rocky Mountain Dharma Center.
After 2 years at Tassajara.
Yeah, well, we were only at Tassajara one year.
Oh, 1 year, 2 practice periods. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
2 practice periods plus the summer.
Yeah. Yeah.
We worked through the summer.
And that's long. The summer is 5 months, really. I mean, it's the guest season.
When Richard was the work leader on the Rokachiji.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I was a Chiden. Is that what it was called?
Chiden's head of the altars, taking care of them.
I did that and learned that the amazing thing about being at Tassajara for me was getting trained in the chanting and in the big.
Oh, you were a doan.
A doan, yeah.
Right, that's the people who run the ceremonies and take care of the zendo and all that.
Standing in that old zendo, barefoot, doing the taiko drum, maybe a peak experience of my life.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
And going out on the hog's back and, getting trained in the chanting where you go out, and I don't know how you'd sort of really shout or speak very loudly and work, anyway,
Right.
it was amazing.
Right. Tatsugami instituted that practice, got us standing. I was a Doan with his first practice period, standing on the hillsides, just bellowing out the chants to develop our voice. But, you had to do it from your hara, from your belly.
Yeah.
And the best was Reb at doing that. Or he was the most dedicated and devoted. He really, really worked at it. I just got by. So that's neat. So you were a Doan and did that. Yeah.
So then we were in Boulder for a while, but then we went to Rocky Mountain Dharma Center and we led, Richard was one of the meditation instructors for the first big public Datun that was at Rocky Mountain Dharma Center.
Well, what was it like? Rocky Mountain Dharma Center had just started pretty much then, right?
It changed its name. I mean, no, it was called that, but it changed its format in 1973, 1974. It initially was intended to be a communal living situation founded by a group of called the Pygmies,
right?
Who came from Louisiana and other places south.
And they were a super hippie group, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they came and they met Trungpa Rinpoche, who took them in as a group, asked them and several other people to move up to this land that was recently purchased back in 1970, I think it was.
I don't remember.
When the land was purchased. Anyway, they attempted to have little communal businesses and be self-supporting, but the intention was, as a self-supporting community, they would host Dharma programs.
Right.
But it never really, community never really developed that kind of cohesiveness.
Yeah.
So Trungpa Rinpoche asked that people, if they wanted to stay, that they participate in creating a Dharma center, which is more like a retreat center.
Yeah.
You could say it's more like Green Gulch.
Right.
Not a monastery, but a practice center.
Yeah.
Which is what happened. And that's what Alice and I were asked to do.
Yeah.
To lead that process.
So there was a loom shop there, a great big building where they were, one of the people who was originally there, they were building looms.
Yeah.
And also making hash pipes out of antlers. So, but anyway, the loom shop became the meditation hall.
And kitchen.
And there was a partition built, and then the kitchen was right next door to it. So Richard, like the construction got that part of the loom shop ready to be a meditation hall, and we got a kitchen together, and then I was in charge of the kitchen. And Trungpa Rinpoche wanted it to be like Oryoki, but that was impossible at that point. So we had 3 bowls, or no, we had
3 bowls.
We had different things in a tray, and people came in the kitchen, and then they went back in and sat.
He really liked the Oryoki ceremonial eating style we did at the Zendo at Tazara with the wrapped bowls that are nested, and all that. And I think he had Bob Halpern, go to Japan and buy a whole bunch of Oryokis there. We didn't even do that at Zen Center. We made it. We fabricated one using what was available, and only ordained priests had the Japanese official Oryoki with lacquer bowls and all that.
Yeah.
And then Rinpoche had at his 3-month training program, I guess it was 1980, was it 1980 when he introduced Oryoki?
That's when it started, yeah.
And then Richard was one at this 3-month thing that was actually in Lake Louise, Alberta, in Banff. And like these 3-month trainings used to take place in big hotels in the off season.
Uh-huh.
So Richard was in charge of practice, I think. Anyway, he had Richard in charge of Oryoki there.
Uh-huh.
And there would be long, for all the programs that involved Oryoki, these long training things to train new people.
Right.
How to use Oryoki. It was really quite torturous.
Right. Well, Oryoki meals at Tassajara in the Zendo, you were sitting longer than during the 40-minute meditation periods, because in a 40-minute meditation period, you'd end up sitting 50 minutes because you came there earlier and then it was over. You'd, take time. And the Oryoki would take an hour a lot, and there'd only be like 15, 20 minutes of it actually eating.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody ate really fast. The eating was really fast.
Yeah. And that, that was an import, eating fast from Japan, that really a lot of people didn't appreciate.
No, especially the early days, there were macrobiotics and you had to chew your brown rice 100 times.
50
okay.
times. Every bite, chew 50 times. Right. And they call it Zen macrobiotic. I'm quite familiar with it. I still eat a lot like that sometimes, brown rice, miso soup, vegetables. We eat a lot of tempeh and tofu here. Tempeh is Indonesian,
Yeah.
One of my vivid memories was Lauren Palmer. I guess we must have gotten a hard-boiled egg in the Zendo because he was eating the eggshells. So you heard this chewing of the eggshells because
he wanted more calcium.
He wanted more calcium.
I didn't know that. I didn't know Lauren was eating eggshells. I'll eat eggshells sometimes. But I only do it to blow people's minds.
Well, those early days at Rocky Mountain Dharma Center, there were these datons, these month-long programs, were supported by several people from Zen Center. Bill Kwong came to one of those. He was there for a few days and taught. Kobin came.
Right.
We had an actual session once in the middle of winter.
Joshu Sasaki Roshi did a session.
No kidding. Well, how was that?
It was a trip.
Well, we'd pick him up at like 3:00,
It was a huge snow.
So we pick him up in the trunk?
He walked.
Did he walk?
Because the only way he could get from where he was living to the Zendo, to the meditation hall, was to walk through this path that we dug in the snow, and you couldn't see him. He was a rather short man.
Yeah.
So you couldn't actually see him walking because the snow was so.
That's deep snow. I mean, he was short, but he was like 5 feet or something.
Yeah, I know. The snow in some places was 6 feet.
Wow.
But he was up there,
He was,
eating it, sitting on a table.
And because we didn't have like a dais to put him on for his talks. Or even, did he sit on that?
Yeah.
So he was on the kitchen, one of the big heavy butcher block tables from the kitchen was what he was sitting on top of.
Yeah, but you covered it with cloth or something, right?
Yeah,
Well,
we
I'm
must
sure we
have.
did.
Yeah. Huh. Well, how was the session in terms of his teaching and the energy and all?
It was all fascinating.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember. It was so long ago.
I don't remember.
And we didn't record anything.
Uh-huh.
So I remember him some interchange where he said to this person who asked a question, he said something about pigs flying in their dreams. I don't know. I don't remember. My vivid memory is sitting with him at the airport in Denver and him remarking, well, that the word in Japanese for foot and leg was the same, like ashi.
Well, ashi, yeah, and it's the same in Indonesian too.
Yeah, so he was saying about this woman that she had pretty legs, but and that somehow that's my memory that we got into this discussion of the same word for foot and legs in Japanese.
Yeah, well, you can distinguish, but yeah, I always find that a little funny too. But languages, people have ways of communicating very specific things. But when you first learn it, you go, well, how do they do that? I mean, there's the word for calf and thigh, and anyway.
But it was an interesting experience having him there. I just remember, mainly I remember it being very dark and meeting him each morning at like 3:15.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Was very
yeah. He had some things in terms of his attitude that were very much like Suzuki, although their teaching was very, very different. I mean, he had koans, and he didn't empower people as much, but I think. But he loved hippies. He said he'd very happy to teach any hippie. He said he'd teach cats and dogs, and he had no interest in having anything to do with Japan, actually more so than Suzuki. I don't know. He was very independent and very interesting. I liked him. I never practiced with him, but I visited him some. I wouldn't practice with him. His teaching was too different, I liked what I was doing, but I liked him. And, his fall from grace because of his affairs with students didn't change my opinion of him. But it caused a lot of trouble for the community and the teachers and all that. But it was, everybody knew about it. I mean, it had been going on forever. They would tell new women who came there, look, if Roshi makes an advance toward you, just tell him no, and he'll back off. And then, like, really, literally, like a decade later or 20 years later, it becomes a big deal. It wasn't anything new. But all right.
That definitely seems to be something in the West and Western students that we haven't figured out.
Yeah. My observation, it is like that in Japan, Buddhism had been around for so long that a teacher was surrounded by rules and a whole culture. So in America, they came and there wasn't any of that, and people had unrealistic ideas, romantic ideas about Zen masters and Rinpoches and all that, and that there were no restrictions. And some Japanese priests who came over, some of them did very well because they were disciplined enough, or maybe just didn't have those urges enough. And then others would just, I mean, Kobun had a lot of trouble because of some brief interludes he'd had with some women. They disturbed him a lot. And, you know, he had to learn to adjust. Ryuho Yamada, he did the opposite. He just became a hippie. You know, he founded like an LSD commune, free sex commune. He loved it.
Ryuho Yamada did?
Yeah, I mean, he went through various changes. He and I stayed close until he died. He went through all sorts of changes, but he was a wild man, you know. Kobun was more like a poet. He was a little more of an introvert in some ways. He didn't, you know, he didn't feel comfortable with a teaching position, really. If it was too public and too much, he didn't like a lot being expected of him, you know.
Right.
He liked his freedom.
Whatever became of Yoshimura?
Yoshimura died young.
He did?
I loved him. He was great. And he's so handsome and so intelligent. Yeah. And yeah, he was from Hokkaido. When I was living in Japan, we went up and stayed in his temple, and that was 1990. For the summer, we'd get out of Okayama and go somewhere where it was cooler or something. And so we did a bicycle trip of Hokkaido for the August. But we started it at his temple. He'd already died. We shipped our bicycles up there, which Japan is really great for doing that sort of thing. They don't, when they arrive at an airport, they ship their bags home. You don't see them walking with suitcases or anything, you know.
Yeah, post office.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved that. They'd come, you know, before we'd go to the airport, Takubin would come to the house in Okayama, pick up our luggage. We'd go to the airport, and inside the airport, we'd pick it up right where you checked it in. You know, so just that whole thing. And you wouldn't see people you'd see Westerners lugging all these suitcases and bags into train stations and stuff. And, you know, once you picked up on how to do that, it really made traveling better. And they believe in spending money, you know. Yeah. But it was reasonable. Delivery there was reasonable. Anyway, all right. So there you are at Rocky Mountain Dharma Center, teaching, and you're also in Boulder.
Before that, then we went to Rocky Mountain Dharma Center. Then from Rocky Mountain Dharma Center, Trungpa asked us to go to Manhattan, to New York.
That's a change.
So with our 6-month-old son, then we moved to Manhattan.
So and Rocky Mountain Dharma Center was not fully electrified, so cabins were like cabins at Tassajara.
Yeah.
No electricity.
Yeah.
Well, and also no running water.
And no running water.
Tassajara did have running water.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a hard one.
So go from that living situation, which we'd been for almost 3 years.
Yeah.
Roughing it.
Wow. And then you went to Manhattan as the teachers of the group there?
Yeah, Richard was called an ambassador. Rinpoche sent out these people and called them ambassadors.
He had 6 ambassadors to major cities.
Like New York, Chicago, San Francisco,
Boston,
Berkeley.
Yeah.
LA.
Yeah. And
we were there for 6 years.
Yeah. And the group supported you.
Yeah.
How many people were in it in Manhattan?
Oh, there were over 100 when we got there, and there was well over 200 when we left.
Wow, that's
And Rinpoche visited quite often, and many of the Tibetan teachers who came through also visited.
yeah.
It was quite a wonderful Sangha.
Oh, that's
And
great.
No, all
so,
the Tibetan teachers came.
huh?
Karmapa came.
Yeah, all of them.
Khyentse Rinpoche came.
Yeah.
Um, the three
Coben visited us there.
Coben visited.
Yeah.
New York's
The Dalai
such a
Lama.
great city.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy
And
New
then-
York? Did you enjoy the city?
Eventually, I mean, it was kind of a shock. And it was, you know, getting to know the community. Like, they didn't ask for this. They didn't ask for a family to support, you know.
Right.
Some of the places got just like one person, but they got a whole family. So,
Wow. Wow.
so-
And then,
and then we finally got at first, like, getting a good place to live took a little while. And
I'm not going to tell that.
we're not going to tell that story.
yeah.
Anyway, eventually we lived on Gramercy Park, which was very nice. And that's where our sons started, you know, kindergarten and first grade. And then Trungpa Rinpoche asked us to move to Nova Scotia. That's when we started trying to move to Nova Scotia. So we went to Nova Scotia in 1983 and 84, and it didn't work out from the immigration because the immigration quotient for Canada was very low during that time, coincidentally. So we couldn't get in to stay. So we knew some things. Richard found a job because he did carpentry and fixing and work stuff. He worked with, what's her name? Catherine Thanis's boyfriend or husband was named Bill.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Richard-
No, Bill was a very brief lover of
Okay.
Catherine's, but they were friends. Bill Smith.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I worked with him.
when we moved to Zen Center. And then Richard worked at, as work leader and did stuff at Page Street and Tassajara and all that. Anyway, so in Boston, then that's what he did.
Yeah.
And that's when I worked at Harvard at the U.S.-Japan Relations Program, and that's when I studied Japanese.
And Richard, you became a therapist. When did that start?
That's while we were living in Boston in between. We went to Nova Scotia. Then when we didn't get landed status, we had to leave. We came to Boston where I was working. And we were thinking about, eventually we knew we were going to try to get back into Nova Scotia when the immigration policy changed. And I thought, well, what could I do in Nova Scotia other than carpentry and construction, which is not, that's sort of a competitive field. And Nova Scotia was not a very it wasn't a lot of money in building and construction. So I took a course at a small college in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I got a degree in counseling psychology. And when we did move to Nova Scotia, I initially, in 1990, I was offered a job as a construction manager and estimator in a small company, Sangha-owned company.
Oh, yeah.
And it was pretty successful for maybe 2 years. But then there was a recession, and that hits construction first as a business or an industry. So that company went under. And that's when I started looking for a job in counseling or therapy. And I did find one after almost a year. And that I worked at that for 17 years. So that's working with a group of people in a kind of communal day program. And
What type
I did
of people did you work with?
that. Seriously challenged people, by their illness. So bipolar or schizophrenia or severe depression, major mental illness.
Yeah, extreme. What did Rinpoche call it? Mentally extreme people. Do you remember him saying something like that?
The mountains in New York called Maitri program. Maitri program is to work with mentally extreme. I mean, that's an idea that arose from a conversation between Trungpa Rinpoche and Suzuki Roshi.
Yeah.
They both talked to each other about their experience of working with people who had, serious neurosis or maybe some psychotic behavior.
Yeah.
Would show up at the doors of Zen Center on Page Street, show up in New York, show up all over the place. So they talked about how they might, what they would do to work with such people.
Yeah.
And Maitri was the plan that Trungpa Rinpoche introduced for various people in our communities and the Tibetan, his students. The program I work in was funded by, was a part of public health.
Yeah. That seems like the hardest work in the world to me. I mean, the little time I have spent with people who were like really out there crazy, whatever you say, was so draining, was so difficult, that, and what I found is that, you really have to have trained people who know what they're doing, because we'd have 60 people at Tassajara, and if we had one person that was mentally extreme, it was hard for us to deal with it.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens in all of our communities.
Yeah, and then to think of one-on-one, one person having to do, oh my God.
But the reason I like this program and I survived in it, it's a community. So you don't really work with people one-on-one alone.
Yeah.
You're working with people as you're doing something else in the community center. So people would come to this. It was designed as a clubhouse, and the members of the clubhouse are those people with severe and persistent mental illness, and they are supposed to run the club, and a few staff people would be around as references or
Interesting.
keeping going. But really, you relate to people not through their illness, but through their work.
Yeah. Sounds good.
So I worked in the kitchen for a long time, and I was helping people to cook the meal. I wasn't actually cooking the meal just by myself. I was helping people to cut the vegetables, but somebody was a head cook. Some member of the club was a head cook for that meal. So that gave people responsible volunteer positions to provide service to one another.
That's very good. That's very good.
I know. It was a very wholesome and quite uplifted and kind of fun place to work.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Wow.
Yeah, as long as that atmosphere was natural. Actually, it wasn't natural. It was some kind of theater because people were coming in and taking on these roles.
Yeah.
But that role is, and their particular kind of illness would make the role much more interesting.
Yeah.
You could say.
Yeah. So let's move further back. I want to know when did each of you? How did your spiritual path evolve? Where did it start, and how did you end up at Tassajara?
Should do the quick version. Some quick version.
Well, when I guess when I was like in 7th or 8th grade, discovering haiku and Japanese like images of the Buddha or Japanese haiku.
Yeah.
And Japanese things Japanese. And I had a friend whose father was a Northwest Orient Airlines pilot, and they'd lived in Japan. So I got very interested in Japan. And then I got interested in just Zen and meditation.
At what age? At what age?
Through high school. I didn't start meditating though till I was in college I went to college when I was 17.
Where?
So wife of the chairman of the philosophy.
Where?
Sorry, what?
Where did you go to college?
Oh, Palliser College in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Where are you from?
Minnesota.
Okay.
So the wife of the chairman of the philosophy department at McAllister, this small liberal arts college, had studied with Yasutani Roshi, and she had zazen at her house one day a week. I don't remember which day, early in the morning, and I'd ride my bike and sit, and then she'd have a one-day sitting. I don't know how often, once a month or something like that. And I do that. That's where I met, I think you know Eric Storley.
Of course.
Yeah. So I met Eric Storley through that, and another friend who I think the name was Fred, but I can't remember. But I was quite connected to Eric.
Yeah.
And sitting, and then I got involved in that, and then Richard, at this point, we'd already met at college, and he was at graduate school, but when he would, or maybe you hadn't started yet, maybe you were in Santa Cruz, I don't remember. But anyway, when he came to visit, then I was all into meditation. So he also, then that's when you began.
That's when I began.
And then we also began macrobiotics. That was
Yeah.
And so then at some point along there, I think like in 1968, I went to school for 3 years and then quit for 1 year and traveled around on a motorcycle with him. And I think that's the first time when we went to Sokoji.
Yeah, it is.
And then,
what year?
68.
Maybe 68.
Wow.
And anyway, then I went back and finished a year of university. You know, I got my degree as a high school English teacher, a BA. And then we got married. Then we
what
went
year
to
did you
Oregon,
get married?
1970. Then we went to Oregon because we were going to be apple orchard people. That was Richard's plan. Back to land. So we're living in a migrant labor camp, basically. Then we went and visited Zen Center.
No, we knew where we might have visited Zen Center on the way to Oregon.
Yeah, we visited there at different times.
But we moved from that place in Oregon right into Page Street.
Yeah, from there we went to Page Street. And we were there.
So that was 1970.
So we were there like pretty much at the beginning. We were there like the year Roshi was dying. He died in December. So we were in Page Street during that year.
But we were there the year before.
Visiting.
No,
No, we were there the year before.
in 1970.
Okay, yeah,
That's when we arrived, and we lived there.
Where did you live?
at the top of the stairs. Well, we must have corresponded, and then we met Rebs standing inside Zen Center when we
Oh,
arrived.
just when you first arrived, you walked into the building and you met Reb.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and but I think we had made some arrangements to meet people.
Yeah.
But we were told that you had to live out in the neighborhood first.
Yeah.
And so we hadn't found a place to live yet.
No.
So we arrived, and we must have had a plan of where we were going to live. But Reb said we could move right in, and that's what we did.
Yeah, he was in charge of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty good. Yeah.
And so then we moved into the room. When you're looking at the Kaisando, to the left of that is where we lived.
Oh, that's a nice room. Right at the top of the stairs, second floor to the left. Right. Nice room. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got unusual special treatment when you arrived.
Right.
So then we were there, and then we stayed there until, Roshi died in December, and Rinpoche came. Well, we met Rinpoche when he came to visit Roshi before Roshi had died. And I remember
That's a good time to meet him.
before he was sick. And I remember a community meeting, or in the sort of, what was it called by the dining room? That room in the dining room.
Well, you mean just the end of the dining room where there was a couch and chairs and a little carpet. Suzuki would go in there after a lecture. He'd give a lecture, and then he'd go into the dining room to the end, and they'd have a more informal talking meeting.
Yeah, we were sitting there with him, and people were asking about Rinpoche. I guess Rinpoche must have been there
Just recently.
recently. And
Right.
sitting there, people were sitting there, and we were there. And Bill Lane, I think, asked about Rinpoche. He said, is Rinpoche drinking to show us something? Is he drinking to teach us something? And I think at that point, Roshi knew us, that we were connected with Rinpoche. And he sort of asked us something about, Bill Lane was asking, is Rinpoche drinking to teach us something? And Roshi said, he's drinking because of his actual, he said, no, he's drinking because of his actual life situation.
Uh-huh.
Which I didn't understand then, but I think I understand it now in a very, he was pointing at something very obvious, that he was drinking because he was drinking, that was the way he was relating with everything, with all of us.
He also said that he said that Trungpa drinks alcohol the way I drink water. He said, but that's a minor problem, and you should, pay attention to how he's teaching you. But he was worried that Trungpa was going to cut his life short by doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which apparently that is what happened.
Apparently, yeah.
at 47. It's shocking when you realize that, when I sort of remember that he was 47 when he died.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, too much. Sad. So when did each of you, what's your first memory of meeting Suzuki?
Well, I guess the first time we met Roshi was on that trip in 1968.
Oh, yeah.
He was teaching at Cincinnati. So, and his English was not that, he didn't have a very large vocabulary then.
Mm-hmm.
Way of teaching. So it was difficult to understand. So that was the first time in there. He's teaching in a place with pews and at Sakoji.
Yeah.
And then there are some newer priests around.
68. There only would have been Katagiri. Maybe Coben was there, or
no, not those priests, not the invited priests. The students.
There were no ordained student priests in 68. But all right, let's see. There was Philip Wilson, who'd been ordained in like 64. Well, there was Dick Baker. He hadn't left yet. I don't know.
But I remember a lot of shaved heads.
Yeah, shaved heads. But they really weren't ordained priests. There were a lot of people with shaved heads and maybe wearing robes to meditation or something. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of audience. But then when we ended up moving into Page Street, we would see Roshi just as leading service or leading zazen or giving talks. And maybe my first in-person one-on-one meeting with him was during a sesshin, and he was offering doksan. And when it was my turn, he was asking me about how I came, just as you were, how I came to practice there.
Do you need some water?
Well, yeah.
Sorry.
So I was describing the arc of my life that led through various kinds of personal experiences of losing heart. And I think my punchline was, it all seems so meaningless.
Yeah.
Meaning the arc of my life.
Yeah.
And he found that very amusing. He was chuckling away at hearing me say, it all seems so meaningless.
Yeah. Yeah.
If there was more either insight or it was, that is true and it's hilarious. It was a kind of turning word. That's a phrase that Mel used to use.
Yeah.
Roshi's turning words.
Mm-hmm.
And that laughter was like a koan for me for quite a while. So meaningless became meaningful.
Yeah.
And what I was learning through practice and listening to him teach was how my life could become and how it was becoming more meaningful.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. I really like that story. I can definitely relate to that because the meaning is found within meaninglessness, or can be. That can be a root. Yeah.
Yes.
And so you sort of it changed your you stopped being depressed about feeling meaningless, right?
You're right.
Yeah. That's good.
Then it became something to investigate, or something to live with, or it's not debilitating. It's a jump.
Yeah, it's a door.
Yeah.
So, Alice, how about you?
Like the memories are all sort of all over the time that I was around him, like different. I think I said this before about when he was asking me, when Katagiri Roshi was going to Minnesota, and he knew I was from Minnesota, and he asked me, he said something about it's cold. I said, oh yeah, it's very cold there. And then Roshi said, I wouldn't get cold. And I thought,
wait a minute. Who said I wouldn't get cold?
Roshi said
Which Roshi?
Suzuki Roshi.
Oh, yeah. All right. He said, yeah, because you were talking about
Yeah,
Katagiri going there.
He asked me, he said that Katagiri Roshi was moving to Minnesota.
Yeah.
And Suzuki Roshi knew I was from Minnesota, and he said, it's very cold there, isn't it? And I said, oh, yes, it's very cold.
Yeah.
Something like that. And then he said, well, I wouldn't get cold. And I thought, oh, that's because he knows how to make inner heat and, you know, his magical powers. And he started laughing and said, because I would never go outside.
That's funny. That's funny.
And, you know, in one of the sessions, he would start in a session, he started talking about going out with the out breath and, you know, sort of describing shikantaza and going out with the out breath. And he was breathing and talking slowly and then saying it's out and then, oh, I'm still alive. You know, the in. And
that
so
was a session that the last session he did sit with us before he passed away.
Mm.
So
that talk is in the book of talks that Ed Brown
did. Uh-huh.
So I think it's
Not Always So is the name of the book.
Correct. That's the name of the book.
And then I also studied.
And that talk is printed, a transcript. You know, that book's made up of transcribed talks.
Yeah.
And talk from that session that we're now talking to you about because we both went to that session. And Roshi was getting more and more ill. So when he's talking about going out with the out breath, and then the in breath was, oh, I'm still alive. It was pretty accurate for his state.
Yeah. Oh.
But I mean, it is like that.
But that's what it's going to be like for each of us.
But it is like that each moment, really.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And another thing from the session, I remember him saying, I think it was a talk during session. I just have these images, but I can't remember the time or the place, but it was one of his talks, and I thought it was in the Zendo, but maybe it wasn't. But people asking what enlightenment is like, and then he said, it gets lonelier and lonelier. You know, it's like, you know, just you, and then it's part of the getting older or what the nature of life is that it's losing things.
Yeah.
Constantly losing things and letting go of things.
Yeah.
And then I studied tea with Oksan.
Yeah.
And flower too, Ikebana. So, you know, having tea in her kitchen and being around that. And then one time he asked us, because we had a car, to we drove both of them to a samurai movie at Sokoji. And that was just, you know, just delightful, like just that kind of experience.
Yeah.
With him. And then mainly it was the sitting sessions. And then at whatever point that we discovered, I think I said this before about, at first people thought he was sick, that he had hepatitis, and the kitchen was cleaned and the food was looked at and all that. And then it went on. And one day, I said this before, I heard Angie Runyon crying. And that's when I knew that Roshi was dying. And then it was very hard in the sense of feeling very sad and not knowing what to do. And being around him while he was dying, it was very powerful.
Yeah.
Just being in that building and
Yeah.
I'm so glad they put that painting of Roshi on the staircase down to the Zendo. He's standing there and you're seeing him as if he were leading the students down to the Zendo. Because his back is what you see. So, but you also see he's life size.
You're talking about when you go down the steps.
Yes.
That I have that on Cuke.com. I hesitate to say now who the artist is. Oh, that's the silk screen, I think.
Yeah.
That's, that's on, if you go to ShunyuSuzuki.com and then go to photos, and you don't go to the big photo archive, you go to the other photos, it includes the pictures of him, like that. And it says who did that, where it's from.
And then Richard worked on the Kaisando.
Oh, the Founders Hall. Yeah.
Founders Hall. And then as a gift, Oksan gave him, she gave you some food or something. But then she gave him this picture. I think it was Ed and Meg's wedding.
And and it's a great picture. He's got like a chopstick in his hand, and she's like hitting him or getting ready to slap him on the back or something. Huh?
I remember that what maybe she said or someone said that I think she was saying, "I love you." And he said, "That's not the worst of it."
Yeah.
I have that on my desk.
Yeah.
That picture is like always with me. And then Pema, I don't know, Pema, right?
Pema Chodron, not personally.
Yeah, she gave, Pema Chodron. She gave me this picture of Rinpoche.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And dressed in a khaki, in his sort of like khaki military uniform, smoking a cigarette, looking great, big smile. Yeah.
With a shaved head, right?
Yeah. Oh, is that a shaved head? Yeah.
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 He shaved his head in 1980.
That's good. So, we've sort of come full circle here. Now, wait a minute. Do you have anything else to say about your stay at Zen Center? Your time there? Anything more about Suzuki, the transition?
No, just that it was very powerful and formative. And one of the things that I've said to friends since then, this is not exactly about Suzuki Roshi, but about Zen Center, that whole community, that as the Shambhala Buddhist community has gone through this falling apart, fragmented practice. I don't know very much about what Zen Center's gone through actually, but it seems that Zen Center in some way, all of you were held together, or what you have in common is that everybody went to Tassajara. Everybody went through the training periods at Tassajara.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that?
Almost everybody. Not everybody, but.
Yeah. And the training periods at Tassajara, I'm sure have changed some, but have kept this kind of form. And the place itself has so much magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's something that everybody has in common, where in this community, there isn't a binding factor like that place.
That's interesting.
Like that magical place. So, and I've kind of given up at this point, thinking that I'll ever be able to go to Tassajara again. The travel.
I know.
The way it's the pandemic, and when we visited there, Tassajara was in a training period, and we couldn't go.
2008.
In 2008, so. That was kind of our, I don't know if it'll arise. And plus there's no going back. Yeah. In terms of my memories, and the Zendo's burned and everything's rebuilt, and
you can't go home again.
Right.
And nobody would know who we were. Like when we went in 2008, it was like, oh yeah, nobody remembered us. The people
Right.
we did get to spend time with Darlene and Tony, and that was important.
Right. And Zen Center doesn't honor its elders. Really.
Okay.
Well, we but also didn't know people. You know, that literally they didn't know to us.
Yeah. Well,
we were from
but there's there's cultures and subcultures that would make treat you as special guests if you came back.
It was a reunion. Everybody was coming back.
Yeah,
right?
no, but if you went back to Tassajara just on your own.
Yeah, well, if we do, I hope that we can get a discount rate.
No, you won't. You might be able to. You'd have to, right now I'd say get hold of me because you wouldn't know who to get hold of, get hold of Reb. There's just not a thing. I started a thing called the Zen Illuminati just on my website. And the whole point, and this was, like 20 years ago, was to pay attention to the older people. Like there's some that need to be visited, that are isolated. And if you go to cuke.com, there's a whole thing on Zen Illuminati. And I made a point to visit a number of people, and I tried to talk it up, and I wrote a letter to the elders, and there's this whole big, are they called elders? The priests committee, right? So, I never got a response. It's just, that's what happens with institutions is they get involved in surviving as an institution and become more focused on the institution and sort of inward focused. Institutions tend to become selfish is what happens. I don't think it's quite as bad as what Ivan Illich said, is that all institutions inevitably come to thwart the purpose for which they were founded. But we have to always be forming new relationships and new ways to connect. And, it's difficult because younger people come up and they've got their own trip going and we don't really live in a culture that takes care of its elders. In Asia, it's such a big deal, and especially in Confucian Asia, like Japan, Korea, China.
How about Bali?
Vietnam. What? How about what?
Bali. Where you are?
Well, it's complicated. People don't tend to live as old here because it's tropics or subtropics anyway. There's good things and bad things, but here it's all community, so it's much, much better. People are really tied to the area where they were born, especially the Balinese, the Hindus here. They all have to go back to the town where they were born for ceremonies and stuff. They're always doing that. And they're always having ceremonies. So they're really, it's got a culture that really gives people a sense of who they are and a sense of security. And, it's pretty good in many ways. They're very good people. There's problems. I mean, if you live here, you'll know there's problems everywhere.
So one more thing that we did was in 2013, was that 2013? Yeah, 2013, Pema Chodron asked Richard to be the director of Gampo Abbey, the Buddhist monastery that Trungpa Rinpoche founded.
Where?
In Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, in the very tip of Nova Scotia.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that's, I think it's 30 years ago. Is that how old it is? About 33?
35 or 60.
35 years. And he asked Pema to be the director. So she's practiced there and worked there. She doesn't live there now, but she's the abiding teacher.
Oh yeah, Zen Center uses that.
Yeah,
the abiding word.
She's not called that, but that's like what she is. She's not the abbot or the abbess, because there's a Trungpa Rinpoche, Tibetan teacher, who was actually a Dharma brother of Trungpa Rinpoche, is the abbot, but that's a titular abbot. He doesn't live there. Anyway, Pema comes there. She'll be there again in January for Yarni. So she asked Richard to be the director and asked me to be the teacher in residence. So we were there for about 3.5 years. But why I'm saying this is because what we really absorbed and learned at Zen Center and at Tassajara, and from being around Suzuki Roshi and Katagiri Roshi, Oksan and other Japanese teachers, and living at Tassajara, living at Page Street, is we understood what it meant to follow a schedule.
Yeah.
And how you, and that's sort of in our bones. Once we get in a situation around people, a practice situation, we don't do well on our own. You ask us, what are we doing these days? We're not good at that.
Well, you seem to be doing fine. You don't have to. You seem to be doing fine with me. You don't have to come up with an exciting report. Where.
Anyway, that has proven to be very beneficial to people.
Right.
And when Richard, basically recently, I've been, until the pandemic stuff, I've been teaching much more. And then things that Roshi said, or things that I've read again from Roshi, or just understood, those come out all the time, and people appreciate it so much. Just as they appreciate that we studied closely with Trungpa Rinpoche. So we bring that into, I think, anytime Richard teaches or I do, and it's not self-conscious. It's like, no, now I have to talk about, I was this Zen person, or this is what I do, but it just comes out, and it's so helpful to people. And so living as lay people in the monastery in Gampo Abbey in Cape Breton, men and women live there, but they're strict monastics, and they're celibate, etc. And then there's a schedule, not like Tassajara. Like, I think sitting started at 6 a.m, and it was nowhere near as rigorous, and there was more work, etc. But we never questioned. We were advisors and working with all the new people that would come through and join. How we understood what it meant to follow a schedule, and how you sort of disappeared into that.
Yeah.
How you struggled with that, etc. That's sort of, I feel like that's part of Roshi's real teaching, of water being poured into water, or milk and water, all those images.
Yeah.
And they have a Han.
They have a Han
at Gampo Abbey, and they have the same thing written on it.
Oh, yeah.
That verse as the Han at Tassajara,
Right.
or Zen Center, at least as I remember
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But his influence, it's disappearing with this old people. Roshi's picture used to be on the shrines. Rinpoche had them there, but then when there was the problem with the first heir, with the regent's picture came down, and Roshi was a victim of that purge of pictures. And sometimes people, one of the old students, Judy Leaf, when she teaches a lot on her own. And when she puts a shrine together, Roshi's picture is still there. So it's and he's in my study, he's in our shrine room. He's the picture is on my desk. It's like he's part of us.
Yeah.
And we both still study tea. We study tea with these two tea teachers who happen to end up living in Nova Scotia. So
the tea teachers who teach at Green Gulch.
And you mentioned that you may have met John McGee when you went with David Rockefeller to Urasenke.
Oh yeah, in Kyoto. Yeah.
Yeah.
That might have been he who we met. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember. Yeah, Jerry Fuller set that up, and he was involved with the tea house at Green Gulch. And Maya, Susan Winder.
Yeah.
Well, very good.
So
anything else?
I just wanted to remind myself and you that this talk that I mentioned before, the sesshin, the last sesshin he sat, here it is in Not Always So.
Yeah.
It's the first talk in the section on shikantaza. That's the first part of this book. It's called Calmness of Mind. So this talk describes the practice of shikantaza, which is in the arc of Tibetan Buddhism, the whole path.
Yeah.
You end up that path doing this practice.
Dzogchen?
I'm not sure if that's
Dzogchen.
Dzogchen. Yeah.
Dzogchen.
Yeah, I can't pronounce it.
Well, that in that tradition, but actually in all the four lineages, you begin with this practice, but you end up with it as well.
Oh,
All right. So it's a long arc of your whole life in which you can explore this. And in fact, these teachings from Roshi have sort of been the common thread of my life since I've received them. So, and it's still happening because I'm now aging, and I think we told you the last conversation that we just did a week-long set of classes facing death.
Oh, with whom? What sort of classes?
They're the practicalities of how it is that you, what you have to do to take care of yourself through your dying, and then all the stuff that you need to have in place. Your will, the power of attorney, a document that it's called a personal care directive. And your plans for your body after you've died, all of that.
Do you have anything about sitting with when you're dying and after you died? Do you have anything about people sitting with you, being with you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So all of that is, current in our life, but it's informed by the practice that I learned there at Zen Center. He's talking about how to do shikantaza, but he also says, right, this is a preparation for when you practice this in your last moment, you will have nothing to be afraid of.
So that's the Zen book on living and dying. Right. Not always so. Calmness of Mind is the name of the talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty good. That's a good place to sign off here.
Okay.
It's been great talking with you all. Really appreciate it. Our second time.
You're not likely to come to Nova Scotia, right?
I have no plans to leave Bali.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for this chance to
Visit you in paradise.
remember.
Yeah. Okay. So Take care.
So feel free to edit.
It takes too much time. You know. I just go through it quickly. Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. This has been a Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogette Bandita, Feline Cuchita, guest Dogette, Boom Boo, and the spirit of dear lovely Katrinka, who's with family in Oregon. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.